I'm your host, Ray Dogum, and welcome to VibeCast. VibeCast is Vibe Bio's weekly podcast where we explore some of the hottest topics in drug development, investment strategies, and technology innovation. Our guest today is Jason Park, CEO and co-founder of Empress Therapeutics. He is also an operating partner at Flagship Pioneering and was a member of the founding team at Sonata Therapeutics, where he served as Chief Operating Officer. Jason, please tell the community a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brought you to biotech entrepreneurship.
Sure. Ray, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on. So my journey into biotech is a little bit accidental. About 17 years ago, I was an undergrad, and I spent my summers actually training to join the Marine Corps because I thought I was going to go into the military and then the medical school. And I got injured, senior year, didn't have a job, didn't know what to do. One of my professors said, "You like doing research, why don't you stick around?" And we ended up spinning out a biotech company, and I was the first scientist there. And I did everything from punching holes in walls and wiring our telecom systems to doing preclinical research. And we were working on nanoparticle drugs to better deliver chemotherapeutics, cancer therapies. And I thought, this is awesome. You can invent something that won't help dozens of people, but perhaps thousands of people. So that's when I knew I wanted to do biotech. I went back, got my PhD, ended up starting some other companies, ended up working as a management consulting at a management consulting firm, the Boston Consulting Group, where I really learned the value of how do you take scientific ideas and translate them to value in the real world, commercial value, medicines for people. And then in the course of that, I met Nubar Fan, the founder and CEO of Flagship Pioneering, and Doug Cole, one of the general managing partners. And they explained to me how they had created Moderna, how they had created Series Health, and all these other really cool biotech platforms. And I joined about 8 years ago to start companies like Sonata and like Empress. And I joined Empress as the CEO because I helped not only found it, but it's a very personal mission.
Yeah, and tell us more about the mission. So what is Empress Therapeutics trying to do, and what problem is it trying to solve?
The fundamental problem is we need better medicines. We need more medicines, right? There are so many diseases where we've made great progress, and for every one that we have, there are dozens more where there simply aren't good therapeutic options. And Empress is a small molecule discovery company. What we do is generate small molecule medicines. These are the things that you typically think of when you think of a pill that you can take, every day to treat a disease. What we have is a proposition. We think we've built a platform that allows us to much more predictably and quickly generate drug leads that we think actually will have a higher probability of success in the clinic. And that really means a lot. As I've gotten older, I've had friends, I've had family who have had serious diseases, and there's nothing worse than looking at clinicaltrials.gov or trying to figure out what's out there and realizing there just aren't that many options. And I think if we achieve what we're setting out to achieve, we're going to completely change that, our ability to generate medicines quickly.
So can we talk a little bit more about why you chose to focus on small molecule drugs? And before we get there, can we define what it means when you say small molecule? There might be people listening who might think all drugs are small, right? But can you explain briefly, the difference between biologics, maybe RNA therapeutics and things like that, just so you get a sense of the landscape and maybe highlight why you specifically chose, or the team has chosen, to focus on the small molecules?
That's a really great question, Ray. For your audience, small molecules are the easiest way to delineate that is it's probably what you think of from your high school chemistry class. A chemical compound with just a collection of a few atoms, maybe 100 atoms or so. And it's just not that big relative to something like a cell or an antibody, which consists of many, many more things, and is sort of a larger or heavier molecule that you're putting into the body. And the
theoretically,
reason,
you could imagine the larger they are, the more complex it is as well.
absolutely,
In terms of
absolutely.
understanding them. And continue.
No, absolutely. In fact, let's talk about some of the differences and why do small molecules make for great medicines? Because it's the only type of medicine that you can regularly take orally, that you can regularly take anywhere, including in the home. It's the only type of medicine that regularly, easily gets inside of cells, that regularly, easily gets to all parts of the body. Chemistry generally also is easier to make, it's easier to manufacture, it's easier to distribute around the world. When we're talking about medicines, we're talking about patients, and getting medicines to patients, that is a fundamental part of developing a medicine. It's also the longest used modality. If you go back to Neanderthals and find willow bark in their teeth, I mean, people have found this. The reason they were chewing willow bark is effectively the basic chemistry that led to aspirin was out there. So we've been using this as a species forever.
That's a good
So if you
point.
add up all those things, I mean, if someone said, hey, Ray, describe a medicine, your ideal medicine, obviously first it's got to work and it's got to be safe. And ideally it cures you, doesn't just treat your symptoms. But then all these other qualifications are things that you would tick off. And at the end of the day, you're describing a small molecule medicine.
So, what are some of the specific issues that Empress is um, looking at and trying to, fix or create these opportunities so that there are improvements in the way that small molecules are discovered?
Well, I should first start by saying, look, half of the sales of medicines are still small molecules and chemistry-based medicines, which tells you their staying power. Um, and far more prescriptions are written for small molecule medicines because they tend to be a little bit cheaper. The major challenge has been, so no one's denying that they make for great medicines. The major challenge has been it's really hard to find good chemical matter, to find
Mm.
good chemical compounds um, to work with, to turn into drugs. And in fact, one of the reason biologic medicines or genetic medicines have been so exciting is, on the one hand, they can solve problems that certain problems that small molecules can't, but on the other, because they're ultimately rooted in the code of life. If we think back to the high school biology class, DNA leads to RNA, which leads to proteins. You know, we just saw that one of the greatest examples of how using that code, DNA to RNA, allows you to really quickly make biologic medicines in terms of the mRNA vaccines. And so, when things tie back to a code, and this comes back to my engineering background, you can do things very quickly, at least in the lab. You can really quickly design, make, and test your drug products. And that just hasn't been true for chemistry. The way we thought about chemistry it actually started with us literally going out into nature and just digging around, looking for chemistries that were made by nature, made by microbes, made by fungi, made in plant bark. And the current landscape right now, we're seeing a lot of technology come to bear on this. And one way of thinking about it is those technologies allow us to do a lot of that a lot faster. To Instead of making 100,000 compounds, different compounds in the lab and then testing them, you can design millions, perhaps billions in a computer, in silico. You're hearing a lot about the use of AI technologies to do this. At Empress, we decided that there might be a different way to solve that problem, to solve the problem of what makes for good chemistry. And our fundamental hypothesis was, well, we know genetics encodes really important information. Evolution, all of evolution's experiments over time. Ultimately, that information is encoded in DNA. So this insight that you can now go from DNA to RNA to proteins, well, guess what? There are some proteins called enzymes. What they do is they catalyze the formation of chemistry. They make chemical modifications. So in effect, what we've done, the way we use AI to interpret the genetic code, genes that we find inside of humans. We started with genes from microbes because microbes are really good medicinal chemists. We've known this for hundreds of years. We take the genes from microbes, we figure out which chemistries are encoded in genes, have been shaped and selected by evolution. And we know that's a really important starting point because now you've got all the power of evolution at your back, all the power of nature at your back. And then why did we decide to look inside the human body? Well, if you think about medicines and how we test them, one of the first things we ask is this compound, is this molecule safe?
Mhm.
And the compounds that we're working with, we decided to look in the human body because we knew the starting points were going to be compatible with the human body because that's where we found them. And so if you think about genetics plus looking for things that are already human experienced, we thought that should lead us to a very important subset of chemistry. And the really cool thing is we found a bunch of chemistry that have never been seen before, that we have not seen elsewhere,
From
including
microbe
pharmaceutical libraries.
studies or from these are from microbe studies?
No, these are so we have data from thousands of patients, thousands of humans around the world, um, tens of thousands of patients across almost 100 countries are represented in the data set that we've accumulated. And what we've been able to do is understand what chemistries are being made, how are those chemistries different or enriched or depleted in different disease sets or disease states, which allows us to understand not only is this chemistry inside the human, not only is it safe, but what is it good for? What disease
Hmm.
might it treat? And then at the end of the day, this is all computational, this is all model based. At the end of the day, we're talking about pills that people are going to take. You have to test it in the lab. The real mark of a drug is does it work in the lab, and then does it work in humans, and we're seeing it work.
It's very interesting. So you're saying that humans themselves in nature, we have enzymes that potentially create certain small molecules.
Hmm.
Is that what you're inferring?
That's right. Yeah.
And potentially some humans might have the ability or genetic background, thus leading to this creation of certain small molecules that are therapeutic in nature. Is that
Correct.
the idea?
Correct.
So, have you discovered any therapeutic small molecules that you'd like to share from those
Oh yeah.
studies? Yeah.
I see what you're asking. Uh, So my background is in both bioengineering and immunology. We have a chief scientific officer who contributed to the development of some really notable immune drugs like Remicade, like Stelara, like Tremfya. You've actually probably seen ads for these drugs on TV. Um, he used to lead discovery immunology at VMS and at Janssen, J&J. His name is Murray McKinnon. So I think we share a very strong belief that there are a lot of immune diseases where this could be highly relevant. We know that. There's a lot of unmet need and need for better medicines in immune and inflammatory diseases. And so, just as a couple examples, uh, we've got many drug leads. We've got one that is an oral small molecule, and it blocks the production of various cytokines, and the only other way to treat diseases mediated by the cytokines right now are biologics, which you have to inject,
Hmm.
or some other molecules that carry some significant safety issues. So that's one example of a type of medicines that we can generate. And by the way, we went from clinical data to something that really looks like a drug candidate um, in about 10 to 12 months.
Wow, that's really incredible. And hypothetically, like these small molecules that you're discovering, and you mentioned this already, but they could be super safe because it's already something that other humans or people are able to produce. The ones that, for example, in this case, are able to block cytokines. Um, so that's
Yeah,
really pretty
yeah,
cool. That's
and
really
just to
interesting.
yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, safety is something that has to be proven out. For example, in the
Yeah.
context of a clinical trial, but we've tested these on cell models that the industry always uses to understand potential safety signal. We've tested them in mice, we've tested them in rodents, rats. Um, we've started already doing a lot of the safety and toxicology work that you would expect when you're looking at a drug candidate.
Understood. So I understand, the platform that you're building is, in development. You have some things, some drug leads going on, but can you explain to us, what you mean by, a platform itself? Like, what does that mean, and how it's important for drug discovery and development?
Mhm. A platform in the context of a biotech, to me, simply means the ability to generate multiple products. An individual product is an individual drug or an individual medicine. And again, it's sort of back to my engineering days. A platform, if it's actually a repeatable process and something that can produce multiple things, it should be engineerable. It should be improvable. Um, every experiment should teach you more. And ultimately, those things come together to do two things. Again, in my mind, one is it should increase your speed. The next generation of products should come a little bit faster. The second is because you're learning, because you're experimenting, because it's feeding back into the next generation products, your probability of success should continue to increase over time. And so, why is that important? Why are speed and probability of success important in drug discovery and development? Well, it's important because drug discovery and development is hard. We know what the failure rates are. They're quite high, and so you need multiple opportunities. Human biology and human disease is complex. You need multiple opportunities to develop medicines to treat diseases, and it's also important because you want to generate those quickly, and that allows you to again build the company, make multiple medicines, address lots of unmet need, and of course, speed and probability of success. The reason they're really, really important is because we're talking about patients who need medicines today.
Yeah, I appreciate all that context and sort of the purpose and the mission behind what you guys are doing. I think it's really important. Uh, what I want to do now is sort of switch gears and talk about the company itself a little bit more. I know that the company recently announced it's coming out of stealth mode, so to speak, and announcing itself to the public. How were the few months before announcing yourselves to the public? How were they like internally?
They were exciting because we were excited to share what we were doing with the world. They were also excited. It was an exciting period of time because we brought on Murray, who I mentioned, and a number of other folks who had real experience developing drugs, discovering drugs, building biotech platforms, and building biotech companies or making drugs. And we had lots of great data that were coming out. I'd say for us, revealing ourselves out of stealth, that's just one milestone in the company's progression. But I can tell you, everyone at the company is entirely focused on how are we going to make great medicines.
And can you talk to us a little bit about the fundraising journey you've been on as well? For example, how much have you raised so far and from who? At what stage you're at?
Yeah, so we were founded by Flagship Pioneering, which is a company that has created many, many biotech platforms. And even though we just came out of stealth, we've actually been working on this idea since about 2017, right? So
Hmm.
this is many, many years. There was a founding team. It included Doug Cole, included Sabrina Yang, our chief innovation officer, and others. And the founding process really starts with a big what if question. To go back to the beginning of our conversation, the what if question here was, what if nature, what if evolution has already made and tested a whole bunch of drugs inside of our bodies? If that were true, if you could build a platform to get that with some predictability, uh, this could be the greatest source of chemistry to make drugs that we have yet to tap. We've never done this before. The industry has never done this before. And what needed to be true then was, well, what is a hook? Can you use genetics to find these things? And then when you find the compounds, do they actually have drug-like properties? And so the whole founding process over the last 6 years was asking a bunch of questions as to whether that was true or not, trying to kill the idea constantly because there's no shortage of great ideas to work on. And the question we always ask ourselves is this the greatest idea that we should work on? So at this stage, we're convinced there are real drugs there to be made. So we have some of them in hand. We're convinced that we have a platform that will allow us to do this over and over again across diseases. And the stage that we're at, we're still preclinical stage. We've got a bunch of drug leads. We're going to look to transition to becoming a clinical stage company, perhaps in 2025, around that time frame. And yes, and to your question, I think we're still a Series A company. Yeah, entirely
Okay.
founded by Flagship.
Yeah, and it must be such a challenge now for you to identify which leads you want to pursue in clinical trials. Since you potentially have so many. One question that just popped up into my head was: have you considered looking at like centenarians, people who lived over 100 years old, to see if their genetics might tell you a story about specific small molecules helping maybe with inflammation or some sort of other issues Um,
Yeah,
have you considered? Yeah.
Ray, uh, that is a really interesting idea that we've looked at. I'll tell you some of the things that we've done actually. So we've done that. We've looked at other species. In fact,
Mm,
we've looked at mice, dogs, primates, to understand what sorts of chemistries have been made in those species, because that helps us understand the evolutionary pressures of, well, what chemistry is very specific to humans. And I'll take it one step further, actually. So we know in health that diet and environment are huge factors in our health, and huge factors, causal factors, not just correlative factors in various diseases. And what we're doing again is, you've probably heard there's about 20,000 genes in the human body. There's actually hundreds of millions of genes. There's other genes that come from microbes, the bacteria
mm,
in and on you. There's literally hundreds of millions of other genes that one could look at. And if you think about some of the environmental or diet factors, actually some of those factors are sort of imprinted in these non-human genes that are still nonetheless part of our bodies. And so that's allowed us to ask questions like the one that you've asked, is what's different about people, or what's different about this state, or what's different about their diet? And instead of just pointing to some outside factor, we can now say there's something different about their genes. It's just not the genes that you're typically used to thinking of.
yeah, and like you mentioned, like their microbiome has millions of different bacteria with different genetics, potentially producing small molecules that are beneficial for the host. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to look at with that platform. So really cool stuff. Can you share some of the partnerships that you have, or any specific partnerships that you're looking for?
So we have multiple real potential drug products. And that's something that pharmaceutical companies are always looking for. For us, those are, in the first instance, they're proof that the platform works. And another way of saying that is it's proof that we're sitting on this vast, rich, untapped source of medicines represented in terms of the chemistry inside of our body that have been made, selected, tested, in fact, through coevolution and evolution. Um, so how is that relevant to partnering? Well, we know, having looked at multiple different diseases and therapeutic areas, that this chemistry could be relevant from everything from neurologic disorders to infectious disease to cardiovascular metabolic disease to cancer, and of course to the immune system, to immune inflammatory diseases. So we think we're sitting on a pool of medicines, and we have the tools, we have the platform to access it really quickly. So yes, we're looking for partners very specifically who can help us get these drugs to patients who need them faster. And there's multiple ways
Right.
to do that.
So sort of like identifying companies that are willing to take some of these leads and do the research, the safety profiles, and kind of go through the process of drug development. Because since you have so many, it'd be impossible for Empress to take on all these drugs and try to take them all to market simultaneously. So that makes a lot of sense.
It could be that. It could be asking questions like the one you asked about, well, what about this group of people? Um,
Hmm,
could we explain what's happening, and could we make medicines for that group? Even if we haven't done it yet, we have the capability with the right partner who brings expertise or knowledge or data in that particular area.
interesting. So all biotech companies live in this mode of raise money, get data, raise more money, and through that you have to navigate different value inflection points. So my question is, what value inflection points is Empress currently navigating?
Um, the most proximal to us, and perhaps uh, most important, is getting drugs to the clinic. So we've got multiple opportunities. Actually, you sort of alluded to this. Um, it's a great problem to have. You have the opportunity to choose from different programs and decide what are you going to take forward. Um, so that's probably the most important. Um, Here's an interesting take on that. It's usually a seminal moment, right, for any biotech company to take some molecule or compound and do what we call first in human study. to take this molecule that you made in the lab and introduce it into the human body for the first time. That's usually a very special moment. Um, we're working with compounds, at least at the start, that have already been made and tested in humans. So that's where we start. So one of the things we say is we start closer to the finish line. And then there may be work, you may modify the compounds, et cetera, but that's our starting point. So
Yeah, you guys are that makes sense, Jason, because Empress is in this unique position where the drugs, small molecules that you're investigating, have been produced or are being produced in humans already. So that creates a sort of hypothetical safety, you know, uh, first pass, I guess you can call it. But yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, you still need to go through the process to prove that it's still safe once you manufacture it in the way you want to. So
of course.
very interesting. So just looking back at your prior experience at BCG and working with Flagship Pioneering, can you share some like tips or advice to other early stage biotech entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So one thing that I've absolutely learned over the many companies I've been involved with is that big ideas and small ideas, and I don't mean necessarily small, I just mean sort of really moonshot ideas or practical, sort of adjacent, this makes a lot of sense type of ideas. Um, it's still a lot of work no matter what. And so it's better, my personal lesson has been it's better to swing for the fences. It's better to dream about and think about the biggest possible version of a scientific idea, of a platform, of a company. You have to take that with some humility and recognize you're probably not going to achieve it. We work in an industry where so many things fail because it's science. It's the only industry where you're asking fundamental facts about nature that are not yet known. And the only way to prove it is to go out and test it in humans. Um, so that's one of the big lessons is let's go for big ideas. Let's swing for the fences. How do you preserve the totality of that vision while also being very practical in your execution and being very mindful of the risks and the value inflection points? The second lesson is people are key. And I know everyone says that, but culture matters, experience matters, how people work together really matters because at the end of the day, you start with an idea. 99% of what we do is not being super creative and ideating and sort of dreaming. It's rolling your sleeves up, putting the gloves on, getting in the lab and making things and testing them. And you need to have people who, and this was related to my third point, is the culture. Culture is important. You need to have people in a culture where there's urgency. Every day matters. It matters in terms of advancing the science. It matters in terms of the patients who are waiting. You need people who are in a culture of relentlessness. Everything we do, especially in a big idea biotech company, is challenge after challenge. You're encountering things that you may not even have thought of when you set out to start the company. So you actually want a culture where people are even excited by challenges that come up. Um, and then that's related to maybe another point on the culture is the rigor of the science. That's one of the big things that I've learned. Um, rigor of the science and rigor of the business, thinking through all the scenarios and being ready. And one of the things that we say all the time at Empress is there's no such thing as bad data. Data are data. You're learning something, even if the experiment didn't read out the way you wanted to, you should have learned something from it, and it should help increase the success of your next experiment. Um, so those maybe perhaps those are some lessons. I'm not sure there's anything there that others wouldn't say. It's hard to disagree, I suppose, with some of that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think those are great pieces of advice. I think, dreaming big is important, but also, being relentless and doing the hard work that it takes to get this sort of these sort of drug development programs running. It's not easy, like you mentioned. So I'm curious, actually. So I know the company started pre-COVID, and then was there sort of a transition to keep your, the employees, the people at the company sort of motivated to keep going, the people you were surrounding yourself to keep going? Was there any sort of, did you identify any sort of ways to keep people motivated? or was it already everyone? The culture kind of kept it all together.
Culture is an emergent property, and it's not like someone says these are our values, this is
Right.
our culture. So this is really a testament to all of the Empress scientists, and many of whom have been with us for years. I'd say through the pandemic, it was a challenge from a logistical perspective. It was not a challenge from a motivation, purpose, or mission perspective. And I'll give you just one example of that is, uh, the lab scientists who are in the lab, and many of whom have worked with infectious disease and understand the protocols and how to be safe and how to be great. One of the requests was send the office people, the computational people home so that they could spread out in distance and have more space to operate in. Um, they worked all throughout, and we wouldn't be here without the type of people we have, without the type of culture that they have built at Empress.
Well, it speaks to your leadership and the team and everyone at the company. So that's really amazing. I have one final question before we conclude here, and it's related to the broader economic environment. From your perspective, how is the economic environment actually affecting deal flow for early stage biotech investments?
Well, the very, I guess, pragmatic sort of near focus answer would be, of course, it impacts. We work in a business that is heavily capital intensive, and that capital has to come from somewhere, and the people providing it need to see returns. And if there are other places where they can get returns, they'll go to that. Nonetheless, people are still investing in biotech. And that comes back to the broader picture, which is if you think about economic endeavors and business endeavors, what could create more value than extending life or extending the quality of life or treating some serious disease that really limits someone's ability to live and work and go about in society. So I think society will continue to pay for innovation. If you can deliver impact, impact generally translates to, and by impact I mean if you can really make an impact on disease, if you can really have a transformative treatment, that has generally almost always translated to economic value. Um, so I think, the way that this will play out is I think for companies that are creating real value, that are creating real medicines, that are creating medicines that have the ability to impact serious diseases and or large groups of patients, you can still create a ton of value, a ton of economic value, and of course, obviously a ton of impact for the patients. And so those companies, those products will continue to get rewarded. And we're seeing that, by the way. We're seeing that in pharmaceutical deals. We're seeing that in the market cap of really innovative companies. So, yeah, I think it's actually an opportunity, Ray.
That's great. And I think we're only at the beginning. There's so many things that we have yet to discover. And I'm sure the last 20 or 30 years, of course, there's been so much discovery in biotech and it's been amazing. However, with the evolution of AI and things like what you're working on, I think we're only like 10% there. I'd say something like that. So I'm very excited for it. Very excited for you. I want to thank you for joining me today on VibeCast. Best of luck at Empress, and we're definitely following you. Thank you.
Ray, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. And for all you out there, make sure you check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Follow, like, subscribe. We really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thanks.